Gather close, dear listeners, and let me take you back to a time when the world was still young and fresh with wonder. In those ancient days, when the gods themselves walked upon the earth, and the line between mortal and divine was as thin as morning mist, there existed an island paradise called Cyprus. This jewel of the Mediterranean Sea was blessed by the sun, caressed by gentle winds, and was home to artists, poets, and dreamers. But our tale concerns one man in particular, a man whose name would echo through the ages. His name was Pygmalion, and he was no ordinary man. He was both a king who ruled with wisdom and justice, and a sculptor whose hands could coax beauty from cold stone as easily as a gardener coaxes roses from the earth. Yes, Pygmalion was the sculptor-king, and king of sculptors of Cyprus. Now, to understand our story, you must first understand the heart of Pygmalion. In the language of our own time, we might say he was married to his art, though he would have laughed bitterly at such words, for Pygmalion had sworn never to marry at all. He had made a solemn vow that no woman would ever claim his heart, his time, or his freedom. You see, Pygmalion looked upon women with a cynical eye. Through the years, he had watched strong men brought low by love. He had seen brave warriors abandon their duties for a woman's smile. He had witnessed brilliant minds clouded by passion's fog. To Pygmalion, women were like the beautiful ivy that winds around the mighty oak, lovely to behold, perhaps, but in the end, the ivy strangles the very tree that supports it. A man who walks alone, walks free, Pygmalion would often say to himself as he worked in his studio. Alone, I have given no hostages to fortune. Alone, I can pursue my art without distraction. Alone, I can combat every danger, escape every pitfall, and remain master of my own destiny. And so, as the years passed, Pygmalion's heart grew cold toward womankind, even as his artistic genius grew ever hotter and brighter. Free from the complications of love, free from domestic concerns, he poured every ounce of his passion into his sculptures. His workshop became his temple, his chisel became his companion, and the marble became his only conversation partner. Oh, what magnificent works flowed from his talented hands! From great rough blocks of white marble stone, so pure it seemed to hold captured moonlight, within Pygmalion would release the most perfect forms. Men of such noble bearing that they seemed ready to step down from their pedestals and lead armies. Women of such grace and beauty that they might have been goddesses themselves. Animals so lifelike you could almost see their chests rise and fall with breath. When you visit the great museums of the world today and stand before the Venus of Milo with her serene and knowing smile, or gaze upon the Diana of Versailles, poised eternally for the hunt, or look up at the magnificent Apollo Belvedere in the Vatican, when you see these masterpieces, you can begin to imagine what greater wonders the sculptor of Cyprus must have created in his time. His fame spread across the known world. Ships would arrive from distant lands, their holds filled with gold and precious goods, all to commission a single work from the hands of Pygmalion. Yet for all his success, for all the acclaim, Pygmalion remained alone in his palace workshop, surrounded by his marble creations but sharing his life with no living soul. Then came a day that would change everything, though Pygmalion did not know it at the time. It was early morning, and the sun had just begun to paint the eastern sky with strokes of gold and rose. Pygmalion had entered his studio, as he did every day, carrying his breakfast of bread and honey, which he barely noticed as he ate. His mind was already consumed with thoughts of his work. A new block of marble had been delivered the day before, the finest he had ever seen. It stood taller than a man, pure white, without the slightest flaw or discoloration. The merchant who brought it had told him it came from the quarries of Paros, where the stone was said to be so pure that it glowed softly in moonlight. Pygmalion circled the great block slowly, running his hands over its cool surface, feeling the potential imprisoned within, and then he could never quite explain it. Afterward he saw something. Not with his eyes, but with some deeper vision that only true artists possess. Within that marble block, he sensed the presence of a woman. It came to him like the rough sketch of a great painting, just the faintest outline, a whisper of form. But even in that first glimpse, he knew this would be different from anything he had ever created. His hands began to tremble slightly, not with age or weakness, but with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. "Who are you?" he whispered to the stone. "What woman sleeps within this marble, waiting to be freed?" From that moment, Pygmalion worked with a fervor that amazed even himself. Day after day, as the sun traced its arc across the sky, he chipped away at the stone. His servants would bring him food, which he would consume without tasting. They would remind him to rest, but he would wave them away impatiently. At night, when darkness finally forced him to stop, he would lie awake, seeing in his mind the woman who was slowly emerging from the marble. Gradually, oh so gradually, she came forth. First, the general outline of a female form, the curve of a shoulder, the line of a hip, the arch of a foot. Then, with infinite patience and skill, the details began to emerge. Fingers, long and delicate, collarbones that seemed fragile as bird wings. The gentle curves of her form, modest yet perfectly proportioned. Weeks became months, and Pygmalion worked on, driven by a vision he could barely articulate even to himself. The woman taking shape before him was becoming the embodiment of everything he had ever thought a woman should be or could be. She possessed a grace that surpassed all his previous works. There was an intelligence suggested in the tilt of her head, a gentleness in the curve of her lips, a strength in the set of her shoulders. As her face emerged from the stone, Pygmalion found himself working with even greater care. The nose, straight and perfect. The lips, slightly parted as if she were about to speak or smile. The eyes, though closed, seemed to hold depths of wisdom and kindness. And her hair, oh, her hair was a masterpiece unto itself, falling in waves around her shoulders, every strand carved with such precision that you felt a breeze might stir it. Finally, after months of ceaseless labor, there came a day when Pygmalion stepped back from his creation and knew with absolute certainty that one more touch of his chisel would be a desecration. She was complete. She was perfect. She was, without question, the finest work of art he had ever created or ever would create. He set down his tools with trembling hands and slowly walked around the statue, viewing her from every angle. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of his studio, casting a golden glow over the white marble. In that light, she seemed almost to shimmer, as if she were on the verge of drawing breath. Pygmalion found himself pulling up a chair to sit before her, simply gazing at what he had wrought. She stood there on her pedestal, approximately life-sized, her weight resting slightly more on one foot than the other in a natural, relaxed pose. One hand was extended slightly, palm upward, as if offering something or perhaps reaching out to someone. Her head was turned just a bit to the side, and those marble lips seemed ready to curve into a smile at any moment. "You are beautiful," Pygmalion whispered, and even as he said it, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. "You are everything a woman should be, perfect in form, suggesting perfection in soul." And then, as he sat there in the fading golden light, a terrible realization crashed over him like a cold wave. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, his breath caught in his throat, and he felt as if the very ground beneath him had shifted. He, Pygmalion, the hater of women, the one who had sworn never to let love touch his heart, he was in love, hopelessly, desperately, impossibly in love. In love with a woman of cold marble, a woman who could never speak, never smile, never return his feelings. The women he had scorned all his life were avenged in the cruelest way imaginable. From that day forward, Pygmalion was a changed man, though he tried desperately to hide it, even from himself. His hands, those skilled hands that had commanded marble as a master commands clay, now grew idle. He would pick up his chisel, approach other blocks of stone, but no vision would come. His mind was filled with only one image, one form, one face. He would wander out of his studio and down to the shore, standing on the yellow sand and gazing out across the sapphire blue waters of the Mediterranean. The waves would whisper against the beach, and he would lose himself in strange, wonderful dreams. He would imagine his marble woman walking across the waves toward him, her arms outstretched, her lips curved in a welcoming smile. In his dreams, as her bare feet touched the warm sand, the sun of Cyprus would work its magic, turning cold marble into warm flesh, transforming white stone into living, breathing woman, changing that carved hair into waves of living gold. Then he would shake himself from these reveries and rush back to his studio, half hoping, half fearing that the miracle might have occurred. But always, always, he would find her exactly as she was, achingly beautiful, heartbreakingly perfect, and utterly, coldly lifeless. Yet this did not diminish his love. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day. He began to bring her gifts, the kinds of presents he imagined young girls might love. He would walk along the beach and collect the most beautiful shells, the ones that held the whisper of the sea inside them, their insides gleaming with mother of pearl. These he would arrange at her marble feet. He commissioned merchants to bring him precious stones from distant lands, emeralds from Egypt, rubies from India, sapphires, the color of the deep sea. These he would place in her marble hands, which never closed around them but held them as if displaying nature's treasures. He bought birds in gilded cages, bright parrots that spoke nonsense words, songbirds whose melodies filled his studio with sweetness. He had these placed around her pedestal, hoping their life and song might somehow kindle life in her. He brought her flowers, great armfuls of them, roses red as wine and white as snow, lilies that perfumed the entire studio, violets and iris, and every blossom that Cyprus could provide. He would weave them into garlands and drape them around her marble shoulders, tuck them into her carved hair, lay them at her feet. He spent vast fortunes on jewelry, strands of pearls the size of grapes, so lustrous they seemed to glow with inner light. These he hung in her marble ears and arranged around her marble neck. Golden bracelets he placed upon her wrists. Rings he slipped onto her cold fingers. The merchants who sold him these treasures whispered among themselves, wondering what woman could possibly be the recipient of such lavish gifts. They speculated about some hidden mistress, some secret love, and, in a way, they were right, though the truth was stranger than any of their guesses. One evening, as twilight turned the sky to purple and the first stars began to appear, Pygmalion stood before his creation and spoke aloud. "You must have a name," he said softly. "Every being deserves a name, even one who lives only in marble. What shall I call you?" He thought of all the famous names from legend and history. Helen, whose beauty had launched 1,000 ships. Andromeda, the princess chained to the rock. Psyche, beloved of Eros himself. But none of these seemed right. His creation deserved her own name, unique to her alone. And then it came to him, arriving in his mind as perfectly as she herself had arrived from the marble. "Galatea," he whispered. "I shall call you Galatea." The name seemed to hover in the air, and Pygmalion felt it was right as anything had ever been in his life. From that moment on, she was Galatea. He spoke to her constantly, this marble woman who could not hear. He told her about his day, shared his thoughts, confessed his feelings. At night, under the blanket of stars, he would stand at his window and whisper her name to the darkness. Galatea, Galatea. On still nights, when the air was calm and peaceful, he fancied that the stars themselves breathed her name back to him, a gentle cosmic echo, Galatea. And when storms came sweeping in from the deserts of Arabia, churning the sea into white-capped fury, battering the rocks of Cyprus with tremendous waves, Pygmalion would stand in his studio and listen to the tempest. In the howling wind, in the crash of thunder, in the roar of the surf, he heard a voice, the very spirit of the storm itself, moaning in longing as deep as his own. Galatea, Galatea. Pygmalion did something that would have seemed unthinkable to him just months before. He treated his marble statue as if she were a living woman, a queen deserving of every luxury. He had craftsmen build for her a couch in the finest room of his palace, a room whose windows overlooked the sea. The couch was draped with Tyrian purple, that royal color that was worth more than gold, produced from thousands of crushed sea snails and reserved only for emperors and kings. Upon this purple splendor, he arranged the softest pillows that could be found, stuffed with the down of swans, covered in silk that whispered at the slightest touch. And there, with infinite care and reverence, Pygmalion would lift his Galatea and lay her upon this couch. He would arrange her marble hair on the pillows, adjust her marble hands so they rested gracefully, and step back to admire how the fabric complemented her perfect form. Every morning he would visit her there. Every evening, before he slept, he would come to bid her good night. His servants thought their master had gone mad, but they were too loyal or too afraid to say anything. The days turned to weeks, the weeks to months, and thus the time wore on. Pygmalion, once so proud and independent, was now a prisoner of his own creation, bound by chains of love to a woman who existed in form but not in life. And then came the announcement that would change everything. Throughout Cyprus, heralds proclaimed that the great festival of Aphrodite was drawing near. This was the most important celebration of the year, for Aphrodite was the patron goddess of Cyprus. It was said that she had been born from the foam of the sea near the island shores, rising up in perfect beauty from the waves. Every year, the people of Cyprus honored her with magnificent celebrations. Preparations began throughout the island. Altars were built and decorated with flowers. Animals intended for sacrifice were chosen and garlanded with ribbons and blossoms. Priests and priestesses purified themselves and rehearsed the ancient rituals, the air filled with excitement and anticipation. As king of Cyprus, Pygmalion had certain duties to perform during the festival. He was expected to lead the processions, to make the primary offerings, to speak the sacred words on behalf of his people. In years past, he had performed these duties with perfect precision, but little emotion. The festivals were simply part of his royal obligations, no more meaningful to him than signing decrees or hearing court cases. But this year was different. As the festival approached, Pygmalion felt something stirring in his heart. A desperate hope began to grow, fragile as a flame in the wind, but impossible to extinguish. Aphrodite was, after all, the goddess of love. She had the power to kindle love in the coldest heart, to unite the most unlikely lovers. If anyone could help him, surely it would be she. The morning of the festival dawned bright and clear. The sun rose over the sea in glory, turning the waters to gold and touching the white buildings of Cyprus with rose-colored light. The entire island seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. From before dawn, the smoke from dozens of altars began to curl upward into the pristine sky, carrying prayers and petitions to Olympus. The rich scent of incense filled the air, frankincense and myrrh, sandalwood and cinnamon mingling with the natural perfume of the great pine forests that covered Cyprus's hills. The resinous smell of pine and the exotic spices of incense created an intoxicating atmosphere that seemed to blur the line between earth and heaven. Throughout the day, cattle lowed and sheep bleated as they were led to the altars, their horns and fleeces decorated with ribbons and flowers, wreaths of blossoms around their necks. Music filled the air, the sweet notes of lyres, the rhythmic beat of drums, the pure voices of the temple maidens singing ancient hymns to the goddess. As king, Pygmalion led the processions with all the dignity and grace expected of him. He wore his finest robes, a crown of olive leaves upon his head. He spoke the ritual words, made the prescribed offerings, and performed every ceremony exactly as tradition demanded. To anyone watching, he appeared to be the perfect image of a devoted king honoring his patron goddess. But inside, Pygmalion's heart was thundering. His mind was not on the ceremonies, but on what he would say when the public rituals were finished, and he had his chance to pray alone. He had thought of nothing else for days. He had rehearsed the words 1,000 times in his mind, then changed them again. How could he possibly express the depth of his longing? How could mere words convey what he felt? Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western sea, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, the public ceremonies concluded. The crowds dispersed to their homes, carrying the blessed atmosphere of the sacred day with them. The priests and priestesses retired to their sanctuaries, and Pygmalion found himself alone beside the main altar of Aphrodite, the altar from which smoke still rose toward the heavens. The king of Cyprus stood there for a long moment, suddenly overcome with uncertainty. Never before had his words faltered when he approached the gods. Never before had he felt this strange mixture of hope and fear, desire and doubt. In all his dealings with the divine, he had always been confident, even commanding. But now he felt small, vulnerable, like a child about to ask for something he knows might be refused. Slowly, Pygmalion knelt beside the altar. The marble was still warm from the sacrificial fires. He clasped his hands before him and looked up at the smoke rising toward the sky, toward Olympus, toward the goddess who might, just might, be listening. "Oh, Aphrodite," he began, and his voice, which had been so strong and clear all day during the public ceremonies, now trembled slightly. "You who can do all things, you who have power over every heart, you who join lovers and bless marriages, hear the petition of your servant." He paused, swallowing hard, gathering his courage. "Grant me, I pray, a wife." The word stuck in his throat. What was he asking? He forced himself to continue. "A wife like my Galatea." There, he had said it. Not the words he truly wanted to say, not "give me my Galatea herself, bring her to life, work this miracle for me." No, he hadn't dared to ask for that. His request had been cautious, guarded, asking merely for someone similar to his creation. But Aphrodite, the all-knowing goddess of love, heard not just his spoken words, but the words of his heart. She knew what he truly desired, and from her place on Olympus, she smiled. How sweet it was to see proud Pygmalion, the scorner of women, the hater of love, finally brought to his knees by that very force he had tried so hard to resist. If Pygmalion had been watching the altar at that moment, he would have seen the sign that his prayer had been heard. 3 times, the flames on the altar suddenly shot upward, rising in perfect fiery points toward the heavens, before settling back again. It was the traditional sign of divine favor, the god's way of saying, "Yes, your prayer is answered." Pygmalion rose from his knees, his legs slightly unsteady. Had he seen the flames leap up? He wasn't certain. Perhaps it had been just a trick of the evening light, a coincidence of wind and fire. He didn't dare to hope too much. Hope, he had learned, could be the most painful thing of all when disappointed. As he walked back through the streets toward his palace, twilight was deepening into night. The celebration continued around him, people laughing, music playing, the joyful sounds of the festival. But Pygmalion barely noticed. His mind was entirely focused on what awaited him at home. The room was dim in the twilight, lit only by the soft glow of early evening coming through the windows. Pygmalion's eyes went immediately to the couch where Galatea lay upon the purple fabric. And it seemed that as he entered, her eyes met his. Those eyes that had always been closed in marble sleep appeared to be looking at him. And her lips, those perfect marble lips, seemed curved in the slightest hint of a welcoming smile. "I am imagining things," Pygmalion told himself, even as his feet carried him swiftly across the room. "It is only the light, only my desperate wishes making me see what is not there." He knelt beside the couch, as he had done so many times before. His hands were shaking as he reached out to touch her face. How many times had he done this? How many times had he traced the contours of those features he had carved? Gently, reverently, holding his breath, Pygmalion leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. So many times before, he had kissed those marble lips. So many times, he had felt their icy coldness send a chill straight through his heart, a reminder of the impossible nature of his love. But now something was different. The lips beneath his were cool, yes, but not with the deathly cold of stone. They were cool as skin is cool in the evening air. They were soft, they were yielding, they were alive. Pygmalion pulled back, gasping, afraid to believe what his senses were telling him. With trembling fingers, he reached for one of her hands. Always before, that hand had been stiff, heavy, unyielding as stone. But now, as he lifted it, the fingers curled gently into his palm. The hand was soft, warm, alive. His fingers touched her hair, and instead of carved stone, he felt silk real hair, soft and wavy, with that same golden sheen he had labored so long to capture in marble. Aphrodite, he breathed, barely able to form the words. Oh, merciful Aphrodite. And then, gathering all his courage, with the same reverence with which he had laid his offerings on the goddess's altar that very day, Pygmalion kissed her again. This time, as his lips met hers, he felt them move in response, felt them warm beneath his own, felt life flowing through them. He pulled back and watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as slowly, those perfect eyelids fluttered and opened. Her eyes were like pools in a dark mountain stream on which the sun is shining deep and clear and sparkling with light. They were exactly the color he had always imagined they would be. And they looked directly into his own eyes with an expression of timid gladness, of wonder, of dawning recognition. Her cheeks, which had been white as snow, now blushed with the soft pink of roses. Color spread across her skin like sunrise spreading across the sky. Her lips, no longer marble pale, flushed with warm, living red. She drew in a breath. He saw her chest rise and fall, and with that breath came life, complete and whole and perfect. Galatea, Pygmalion whispered, tears streaming down his face. My Galatea. And she smiled at him, a real smile, warm and alive, the smile he had dreamed of seeing. Her hand, still held in his, squeezed gently. She opened her mouth as if to speak, though no words came yet. Perhaps Aphrodite had given her life, but left it to her to learn speech, as all mortals must. Or perhaps she was simply too overwhelmed, too new to this world, to form words yet. But words were not necessary. In her eyes, Pygmalion saw everything he needed to see. He saw wonder at the world into which she had awakened. He saw trust as she looked at the face that was the first face she had ever beheld. And he saw the beginning of love, for how could she not love the one who had created her, who had brought her into being, who had loved her even when she was nothing but cold stone? Pygmalion gathered her gently in his arms. This miracle, this gift from the gods. She felt light and warm against him, her heart beating steadily against his chest. He held her carefully, as if afraid she might dissolve like a dream at dawn. But she did not dissolve. She was real. She was alive. She was his. And what happened after that miraculous day? History has been kind enough to leave most of their story private, allowing Pygmalion and Galatea to live their lives away from the scrutiny of legend and myth. But we know enough to satisfy our curiosity. We know that their love, born in such extraordinary circumstances, proved to be real and lasting. We know that Galatea learned to speak, and that her voice was as beautiful as Pygmalion had always imagined it would be. We know that she was intelligent and kind, as wise as she was beautiful, and that the perfection Pygmalion had glimpsed in marble form was matched and indeed exceeded by the perfection of her living soul. We know that together they ruled Cyprus with justice and compassion. We know that their subjects marveled at their happiness, and that poets sang songs about their love. We know that Galatea brought to Pygmalion a joy he had never imagined possible, and that he, in turn, cherished her with a devotion that never wavered. And we know that in time, their love was blessed with a son. They named him Paphos, and he grew to be a man of wisdom and strength. In his honor, Or perhaps in honor of the goddess who had made his parents' union possible, the great city of Paphos was founded on Cyprus. It became one of the principal centers of Aphrodite's worship, a place where lovers would come to pray and where the goddess's power was celebrated. As for Aphrodite herself, perhaps, in her palace on Olympus, she would sometimes pause in her divine pursuits to look down at Cyprus and watch Pygmalion with his living, breathing wife. Perhaps she would smile to see how the proud king who had once scorned all women now devoted himself utterly to one woman. Perhaps she found it fitting that the sculptor who had thought himself above love had become love's most complete servant. For that is what happens, dear listeners, when we try to wall our hearts against love. The very walls we build become the foundations of love's greatest triumphs. The defenses we construct become the stages for love's most dramatic victories. Pygmalion built his walls of marble, carved his defenses from stone, only to find that love could bring even stone to life. And so our story ends where all the best stories end, with love triumphant, with hope fulfilled, with two souls finding in each other all the completion they had sought in vain elsewhere. Remember this tale when you feel yourself becoming cold and closed to love. Remember Pygmalion, who learned that the heart he thought was stone could be brought to life as surely as his marble Galatea. Remember that the gods themselves smile upon those who dare to love, even when love seems impossible. And remember, most of all, that the greatest works of art are not those we carve from marble or paint on canvas, but those we create in the living warmth of loving and being loved. Thus ends the tale of Pygmalion and Galatea, the sculptor-king and his living masterpiece, whose love story reminds us that sometimes the most perfect creations spring not from our hands, but from our hearts.